yourself as one of the crew of this faster-than-light spaceship of the future, sharing their curiosity to know the unknown, their tension, their readiness for inconceivable adventures.
Sir, we're being radar scanned.
United Planets Cruiser C-57D, J.J. Adams commanding. Who are you?
Morbius of the Bellerophon.
Oh, Dr. Morbius, my orders are to survey the situation on Altaira 4.
Commander, if you set down on this planet, I warn you that I cannot be answerable for the safety of your ship or your crew.
When you reach the Forbidden Planet, you will meet Dr. Morbius, played by Walter Pidgeon. The Doctor is sole owner of this fabulous world. Anne Francis is his alluring daughter, Alta, who has never seen a young man till she meets Commander Adams, played by talented Leslie Nielsen.
Come on in.
Didn't bring my bathing suit.
What's a bathing suit?
Oh, murder.
You will meet a charming character in the Robot, able to produce, on order, 10 tons of lead or a slinky evening gown. Always at your service.
You must be the loveliest, softest thing you've ever made for me. And fit in all the right places. With lots and lots of star sapphires.
Star sapphires take a week to crystallize properly. Would diamond or emeralds do?
You explore all the wonders of a vanished civilization. You travel deep down into the heart of the Forbidden Planet to discover the incredible marvels of this lost genius race. These magnificent scenes in striking Eastman color stagger the imagination.
20 miles. Look down, gentlemen. Are you afraid? 7,800 levels.
Yet the wonders of the planet Altair 4 conceal a strange and evil force, unknown, irresistible.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kulturecast. I am your host, Chris Stachiw. At least that's what I'm told by the people off stage. And I'm joined by my good friend all the way from West Texas. Not robbing banks in West Texas, though you might be mistaken. That's what the subject material of the last couple podcasts that I've had him on. Your friend and mine, he's a professor of media and communications over at Texas Tech, Dr. David Perlmutter.
Hello again. Thank you, Chris.
So, David, I have just kind of turned over programming for, when you and I work together, to you, and you sent me a list of things, a very long, I would say, expansive list of many, many different choices, though I would say they're all kind of, all over the place. I wouldn't even say that there's any one kind of thing that leads me to believe that it's like all sci-fi, or it's all kind of all over the place. So while you might think, that we're going to be talking about more sci-fi the next time we get together, this is just a sci-fi movie we happen to be talking about. But on this episode of the Kulturecast, Dr. David Perlmutter and I are going to be talking about a film from 1956 that I'd never seen, but I've seen one of the actors who's in it and a whole lot of other things. We're talking about 1956's Fred M. Wilcox directed Forbidden Planet. So the film is directed by Fred M. Wilcox, but a screenplay by Cyril Hume, story by Irving Bloch and Alan Adler, stars Walter Pidgeon and Francis, but more importantly, stars Frank Drebin himself, Leslie Nielsen, a very young, very pre-Shirley, pre-Airplane Leslie Nielsen. And the film is a In the research, it says it's a loose adaptation of the Tempest. I'm going to reveal my ignorance here and say I've never seen or read the Tempest. Up until this point, I now know the basic story of the Tempest after having watched Forbidden Planet and in the research. But Forbidden Planet is somewhat a play on the Tempest, somewhat not. So a crew of men from the United Planets finds a planet where a ship had been sent 20 years earlier, and they stopped getting contact with the ship. And so when they got there, the scientist, Dr. Morbius, is the only one left, and he has a daughter. And throughout the film, we figure out why the planet is the titular Forbidden Planet. We'll get into it. I'm very curious your thoughts, Dr. Perlmutter, but as I have done in the past when it is just you and I, and you were the one picking the movie, please, oh please, inform me as to why, oh why. In 2026, we're talking about 1956's Forbidden Planet. Is it a prescient film, Dr. Perlmutter?
Well, I believe that almost all the science fiction that you have been watching in movies and television and video games owes a little bit of a thank you card to Forbidden Planet. It in itself was not radically original. As you said, it's loosely based on a Shakespeare play. It takes some common motifs and tropes and metaphors and allusions to Freudian psychology and a lot of science fiction from the 30s, 40s, and 50s you can find there. But in terms of visual and story, you can see, for example, absolutely, Gene Roddenberry watched this. I mean, you can read about the origins of Star Trek. There's no question this was Star Trek 1.0 in just a lot of aspects. And in fact, I just watched the first 2 episodes of The Orville, which is, people say is a good start. I haven't caught on yet really to it.
Somehow the better version of Star Trek than Star Trek Discovery is what I was told.
Yes, and I don't see that yet. People tell me it gets better, which is true of a lot of shows. They take their time to find their groove, but immediately you can see, the Union of Planets is sending a starship with a crew of different people, and there's a mystery, and a planet has lost contact. I mean, that's 50% of Star Trek episodes of all the Star Trek series is a planet has lost contact or there's something strange going on a planet.
Right.
So this movie is worth watching just for wow, this is like the 1.0 of a lot of stuff that I have watched, or I haven't watched over the entire 70 years since it was made, but I think it's interesting, especially when I played selective clips for students or referred them to it. They go oh, wow, was this they actually think some of them have not seen the original Star Trek, like the original series. They've sort of, as we talked about, they have meme knowledge, like Kirk screaming or Spock and Kirk fighting or a Horta coming out of the darkness or something like that. They don't know the entire series, but they assume that this was the pilot or this was the movie that Star Trek was based on.
Right.
So we can learn a lot there. Plus, it's a really interesting movie of the time, and it's, as we've talked about before, you never watch the same movie twice. Your attitudes can change as you evolve, and also no generation watches the same movie twice. And so it's interesting to see what was considered, A-level, color, big cast, a lot of money on special effects and practical effects of the time. This is not a junk science fiction. This is not a grade Z. The monster is pretty scary. You can imagine on a giant screen in a theater or a drive-in. You're taking your date on a Friday night, and it's beautiful cinemascope and beautiful rich color. I think anyone who complains about the sepiaization of film and television today can probably appreciate just the popping color of this movie. And so I think there's just a lot to take away here, as well as being, I personally find it still to be a fun and interesting plot.
So, like you mentioned, it's very interesting in the now of sci-fi. I was talking about this with my friend Lindsay when we were watching this yesterday. And funny enough, I watched this yesterday in between watching Prometheus, Alien Covenant, and then Alien, well, it's not called Alien Paradise, but a fan of both Covenant and Prometheus, edited the two films together into one film as a fan edit and called it Paradise. And so I spent yesterday watching Covenant and Prometheus just because my friend Lindsay had never seen it, just because they're two of my favorite movies. And then we watched Forbidden Planet, and then we watched the edited together kind of melange of Covenant and Prometheus. And so yesterday I spent a lot of time watching Sci-fi. And what's very interesting is the juxtaposition of Forbidden Planet, which is of the three sci-fi worlds, the Covenant world, the Forbidden Planet world, and the Prometheus world, which are all drastically different in the way that they're presented. Even Prometheus and Covenant, which take place in the same universe, are very different. Of those three, the one that I would love to live in is Forbidden Planet, because the design and the look and the world that it creates is so, I guess now it's, if they were doing it now, it would be retrofuturism. But then it was just futurism. I think that the world of futurism that sci-fi exists with is so much more interesting to me as a viewer now. And, I mean, again, obviously, when the film came out, they were probably taking it for granted because, and like you've already alluded to, in 56, there were tons of Z-grade sci-fi dreck coming out that was, and again, like not to drag one specific author in particular, but I'll drag him for a whole host of reasons. L. Ron Hubbard is one of those authors who just wrote book after book after book after book after. I mean, he was notorious for his prolific nature of writing, but also his ability to just write. Literally, they talk about it in plenty of those Scientology documentaries, that L. Ron Hubbard was a very prolific writer in terms of his ability to write. And so, like you said, there was plenty of Z-grade junk floating around at the time. Just like when Westerns were being written, there was a bunch of junk Westerns coming out as well. Not everything is going to be the level of a Forbidden Planet or of a Star Trek even. And so what's interesting for me as a film watcher is, as someone who's watching this film in 2026, far removed from the 1956, 60 years later, the world that's created within the world of Forbidden Planet is so much more enticing and appealing than anything created by contemporary filmmakers of the last 5 to 10, 15, 20 years. I would much rather live in Forbidden Planet or the original series of Star Trek than Prometheus or Alien Romulus or Minority Report or anything else where there's a level of futurism that is exceeding where we are now that's meant to make our life easier, but it never seems like it in sci-fi. A lot of the sci-fi is like, it's meant to make life easier. Like, the ability to predict crimes ahead of time should theoretically make life easier. But it's, it's the sci-fi twist of it all that it's being abused or manipulated or what have you. And so that's what makes it sci-fi. I mean, again, it is science fiction, but we do have this technology now. It's more just like taking it and pushing it in a subversive or transgressive way, or the way it's being used. So all of that to say, I had a weird juxtaposition watching this movie yesterday with other things that were also sci-fi, sci-fi horror. And I mean, as much as I love Covenant and Prometheus, which I do, they're two of my favorite movies. And I know that's, sacrilege among Alien fans and sacrilege among sci-fi fans, because neither of those movies were well received when they came out. This movie, I think, just crafts something that's so, like we've already talked about, like you've already talked about with Star Trek, the original series, like so appealing that someone else came in and was like, let's just do a whole thing of this. And it totally works. I mean, Star Trek works because of this weird nature of like, we have technology, but we also have people just wearing clothes. Like in Forbidden Planet, it cracked me up that Leslie Nielsen's just wearing like a shirt. He's not wearing a helmet. He's not any of this. They do the old sci-fi trick in the first 5 minutes of the movie where they're like, gravity on the planet is 0.879. So just adjust your thing. It's just like, adjust the thing so we don't have to do anything in terms of practical effects to address it. Just adjust your thing so that you can walk around normal and it'll look normal when we're filming, because that's what we want to do. Like, it's that level of just like, I don't know, like working with what you have and not trying to, not being ashamed that it's just sci-fi with people wearing clothes. I like that the sci-fi setting is almost secondary to the story that it's telling, because the story that Forbidden Planet is telling, to the Shakespeare of it all, is very Shakespearean in its qualities. Like, it's very, I would say, heady in what it's getting at. And not that sci-fi is or isn't heady by definition, but like, you could have told this story any anyway, like without the like sci-fi machinations of like there is a sci-fi creature running around. It could just be like the smoke monster on Lost if we're talking about externalizing the id or creating something that's kind of unintelligible but exists within the framework of the narrative we've been presented. You could have done that. I'm glad they didn't. I'm glad they did something a little bit more sci-fi trappings, but the story that the film is telling is one that I think is, like you and I were talking about privately about Twilight Zone. Like Twilight Zone is amazing because it's timeless in the nature of the stories that it's telling. The best episodes of the Twilight Zone. This movie's story and theme and kind of nature, I think, are timeless in what it's asking, in the presentation, in what it's expecting of the audience. And I really enjoyed it. I mean, I understand now why this movie is as well regarded as it is.
Yes, it's a movie that has layers, and you can enjoy all the layers or just one. Like a cake where
you can just watch it as a sci-fi movie and just as a sci-fi movie, and that's it. Or
if you just want to watch a fun adventure, it's there. I mean, there's fear, there's combat with a monster, there's the handsome guy and the pretty girl, love story. There's just there are all the elements of a fun, straightforward story. But there's a lot of depth there. Let's break down some of the things you've said. 1956 is Eisenhower is president. We are in a Cold War, but we're also in a time of great optimism.
Right.
We've gone through the apocalypse of World War II, right? And I'm sorry, Chris, I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Yeah, I was fixing my headset.
Sorry, great.
No, you're good.
We've gone through the apocalypse of World War II. At least in the United States, people have come home. They've gone to college in the GI Bill. They've gotten married. We're having the baby boom. We're in the right there in the baby boom. So there's a lot of hope about technology, all kinds of technology, nuclear technology. There's hope. We're going to have nuclear roads and cars, and there's a lot of optimism about the future, and you can see it there. Like this is competence porn of a kind. Like everybody involved from the Krell, the ancient alien race, are super competent. In fact, there's a moral to that story there that I'll get to in a moment. But the crew, everybody in the crew does their job. The scientist does his job. It's a time where you could say that, like, okay, well, there's not the moral complexity and shades of gray, but actually, this is a really brilliant film for bringing out the question of morality and ethics. But in terms of technology, it's futuristic, positive futuristic, and also, but plausible. Right. Okay. Within what they knew at the time. There's a famous science fiction writer named John Christopher. He became pretty well known in the 60s and 70s, British writer. He was the king of YA apocalypse. He wrote the Tripods story, which became super famous, influenced a lot of War of the Worlds type other stories. And I remember reading in like a little biographical note he made that he wrote regular science fiction up through the 1960s. But then when we actually started sending probes to other planets in the solar system, he realized that you couldn't have a civilization on Mars anymore. You couldn't have astronauts hacking their way with machetes through the jungles of Venus anymore. That the solar system was pretty much out. Now, there are still movies made. I hope we'll get a chance to watch Europa Report. There's still possibilities,
but they're few and far between now.
Yeah, but it's really
this kind
low.
of sci-fi is gone in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And like I know it's a cultural change in the tastes and tones of the time, but I do miss this level of sci-fi I do miss it because I think it's like looking forward with a level of positivity as opposed to a level of cynicism, I think is important because I don't think that the future with technology is one or the other. It's a balance of both. It's like that. We have the AI is going to kill you movies over and over again, but we haven't had yet recently the AI is helpful movie of like solving things. Like we have the AI Minority Report movie that came out that looks like a movie created by AI, Mercy, that Chris Pratt movie. Like it is warning against the the far-reaching nature of AI. This movie is warning against the human nature, not the technology of the time being the problem. The human nature is the problem, which is so much more of a not like a base level thing that's like they've dug down all the way to get to this. And I always find that more interesting when sci-fi is used as a vehicle for something, as opposed to just like, the technology is so crazy, we can make robots that can travel back in time to kill you in the past, to stop you from ever existing. Like, yeah, once we get past that as an idea, it kind of falls apart, huh? Like, you know.
Yes, so that's the level of complexity that you can move up the ladder, because in a lot of 1950s, 1960s, low-budget science fiction films, there's a scientist who's not quite a mad scientist, but like gets too excited about the science and doesn't see the consequences and ramifications, and maybe designs a robot that goes crazy. That's a pretty familiar plot. He has a beautiful daughter. There's a protagonist hero. So this has some of those elements, but then it has this really interesting level of thought experiment. Now, again, this is the 1950s, so Freudian psychology permeates the cinema, right? We have Alfred Hitchcock, Spellbound. If you had a psychological element in a film in the 1950s and 60s, it was something Freudian. So, of course, they're taking something Freudian here and mixing. That's pretty high-level culture, right? Mixing Freud and Shakespeare for a 1950s science fiction movie. And so,
but the question is also, is it
let me
being
just get to the core story a second to focus on this. So we have this planet where the Orville, the Starship Discovery, the Star Trek Enterprise visits. There's something wrong. An expedition, scientific expedition went there, not a military expedition, a scientific expedition to learn new knowledge. And we find this scientist and his daughter are apparently the only survivors of the expedition. And we find that they have discovered something incredible. This city that belonged to what apparently were a extremely advanced civilization, maybe hundreds, thousands of years beyond us, maybe millions. They play around with that, but let's just say they're very, very advanced. And by the way, I really like that you don't necessarily see them right away. I mean, there's the apparition monster, which I guess is a version of them interpolated through the human imagination. But for example, they do this. It's a wonderful practical effect. The doors, the passageways are shaped to fit them.
Right.
And they're sort of, it's hard to describe unless you see the movies, but they're crab people. They're crab shaped. And so they have giant crab doors.
What the doctor says about the apparatus that he could put on his head. He's like, it's clearly made for something less humanoid than us. And it's like, yeah, because the things are like 8 feet in each direction. It's like, how big were the heads on these things? Like but they get a lot of mileage out of that. Like, working within the framework of what you have and not belaboring that you don't have it, but working around it in a way that makes sense. Like you said, showing a doorway that they would have to go through, showing a thing that they would use, like showing when we finally see the monster, it being kind of what they might be or adjacent to that. Like, you get a lot of mileage out of it, which, doesn't cost much compared to spending hundreds of millions of dollars on CGI.
Yes. And I really think that that's very important to look at the Krell city there. I don't know whether this was the first movie that established the trope of advanced aliens don't have guardrails on impossibly high passageways. Which goes, Galaxy Quest had fun with that one, but like you see in most science fiction, OSHA would not approve of the construction there. But the Krell are these super advanced, and they all disappeared. So there's this great mystery, and we're not giving away. I hope people watch the movie, but
10 years
the mystery
is the statute of
solved.
Limitations with spoilers on this show. Yeah. This movie is 60 years old.
The mystery is solved, but it's solved not, again, in the sort of simplistic, stereotypical way that a lot of movies then and a lot of movies now have, which is technology bad, don't go too far with technology. Actually, they're not saying like advanced technology is bad. They're saying that human beings have to adjust to learn how to control themselves in relation to the technology. So the analogy would be nuclear power. There are many people I know within the environmental world who say, gosh, nuclear power isn't that bad as long as you don't have accidents. It actually saves a lot of energy compared to some other forms of energy. But the point is, but on the other hand, we have nuclear weapons, right? So the question is, what are humans going to do with this? And in terms of relevance, I think some of the issues about this Krell mind expansion device are extremely applicable to the world of AI and what we're going to do with AI, and to what extent AI is an extension of humans or dumbs down and degrades humans. I mean, so this goes back
both
to something,
at the same time.
Yes, that's right. This goes back to something that I've brought up a lot about my favorite literary insight by J.R.R. Tolkien about how good literature is applicable. It's not a question of like, oh, this 1950 movie, they dress a little funny and their social relations are not necessarily what I approve of necessarily, but a lot of the ideas and situations are applicable to our time today. And frankly, they could have remade this movie. I don't want them to.
But they talked about it apparently for quite some time, and we almost got it several times, if not still bandying about.
They didn't.
They're still bandying about an idea of as recently as 2 years ago. Brian K. Vaughan doing a treatment of the script. I'm with you. I think, like you said about Tolkien and, someone like, Rod Serling, like to go back to the Twilight Zone of it all, which I think is a very good example of sci-fi being applicable at its most successful. Like, I think it's important that the things that we watch, if you're going to do something like this, be timeless, because it allows it to transcend the time and place that it exists within. I mean, that's the definition of timeless, obviously, but like as a creator, you should want that. And I know that not everybody does. I know that it's not easy. I know that to hold yourself to that is also not something that can be convenient, or that may not even be somebody's, reason for doing things. I think of a very famous interview with, as recently with Stuart Copeland reacting to Sting, saying that Sting didn't like why Stuart Copeland played music and wrote songs. And Stuart Copeland just played music and wrote songs because he just liked to play music and liked to play, like, bang on the drums really hard. And Sting is, all the music the song has to serve the music, and the song, and I'm like, not saying that's wrong, but two people can do the same thing ostensibly, outwardly, for different reasons inwardly, and very vastly different reasons. And with something like Forbidden Planet, to your point, I don't want to see it remade, because what else is there to say other than punching up the recent, the truly topical nature of it? So replacing Robby the Robot with a nanobot AI cloud, or God knows what, which, by the way, to go back to the War of the Worlds of it all, that War of the Worlds movie with Ice Cube that came out last year, one of the worst movies I've ever seen, one of the worst movies ever made, and one of the best examples of what it means to truly make a lazy film in the time of AI. I'd like to point out to anyone listening, if you have an issue with AI, it's not really AI that you have a problem with. It's people and how they use AI. That's the problem. Because AI can't do anything on its own at the point that it's at now. It is not Skynet. I know everybody wants it to be Skynet, but it's literally not Skynet. It's destroying the environment because we are using it. If everybody stopped using it, wouldn't destroy the environment, because there would be nobody using it for it to happen. And so I don't know if I need a Forbidden Planet that's updated to the times, because I can just transpose an idea onto this film without this film having to directly talk about it, which I think is what Tolkien is getting at with, like, it's applicable in one direction and technically in the other direction. But when it's only applicable in one direction, it becomes very dated. Like, to go back to Twilight Zone, the most recent readaptation of the Twilight Zone, which features, such great episodes as Adam Scott listening to a podcast on an airplane, a la 40,000, Nightmare at 40,000 Feet, and the episode I told you about, which is Jacob Tremblay as a child playing the president. Hardy har hard, don't you get it? Like, you don't have to do that. You can do it from the other direction and make it timeless in and of itself, and apply it forward as opposed to backward. And that's what this movie I think engages.
This comes to a real issue about when we say we want to do a modern retelling of something. Yeah, well, okay, Shakespeare, who, by the way, almost always borrowed his plots from previous, either antiquity or histories, myths and legends and so on.
Shakespeare borrowed from real life with Caesar. It's like what was he writing it from? Literally what happened. But he dramatized it in an interesting way. He made it applicable, which is hard to do, I get, but it's so much more for me as a creator rewarding than just making to make.
That's right. So look, let's face it, almost all modern retellings have as one of their motives a cash grab, right? There's something associated with the property and, okay, they think they're going to get people to come in the theater. The War of the Worlds was a modern retelling, a very bad modern retelling, but part of the issue there was that what were they telling? What was the story? What was the insight that the 100 other versions, the Orson Welles version, didn't have?
The insight was that Ice Cube could sit in front of a computer for an entire movie and get away with it and get paid. He pulled, to go back to the reason you and I are friends, he pulled a Seagal. He's just doing a Seagal, a late stage Seagal. He's just sitting on his ass in front of a computer for an hour and a half and getting paid. Steven Seagal made an entire VOD career of just sitting at a table or standing in one place and talking to people and then cutting away. Ice Cube's getting paid. I don't know what the point was other than, as we all know, War of the Worlds is, open, it's a fair use title. So anybody can adapt it openly and fairly. So that's really what it comes down to.
The other point here that is a takeaway, which I could imagine in 1956, a family going to watch this movie, right? You would go there and maybe the dad was in the army and had seen some things.
Right.
In his service. And I know the mom was in a nursing corps. She was building tanks in Detroit, and they were trying to live a quiet, comfortable life, which you could in the 1950s economically. And they've got some young kids, and hey, let's go watch this fun science fiction movie. And I think they could watch. There's some scary parts, and maybe you'd cover the kids' eyes at a couple of points. But I think walking out of the theater, the dad and the mom would be going for hamburger and ice cream and saying, kids, that was a fun movie, but there was a point there. And we just went through something about a decade ago called World War II, where we found out the depths that human beings can go in their destructiveness completely out of their mind, in the sense of creating these visualizations of horror and then making them happen. I thought this movie was a great metaphor for World War II, where you have in the 1930s politicians, leaders, talking about bombing cities, talking about destroying entire countries, talking about conquering nations and so on. And then in the early 1940s, or late 1930s, early 1940s, they set out to do it. Their ideology trapped them. Yeah. World War II sort of started in the late 1930s. Japan invaded China, and the crimes committed by Japan in China rival those committed by Germany in Europe in terms of the horrors that they perpetuated. So it was like this horrible dream where crazy, evil people had machines, bombers, tanks, machine guns, airplane, battleships, and they made the horrors come to life. So I would have think a 1950s family would come away entertained, and Robby the Robot was fun. It was what a great 1950s conception of a robot. And of course that model was used again and again and became the model for the robot, not the exact one, but the same, very similar mannerisms and voice. You've got also the robot. It has the whole Asimov's laws, right? Programmed not to kill. So there's a huge inheritance there in every movie where there's an intelligent computer or a robot or something like that. So it really is a masterpiece in my mind of combining entertainment and thoughtfulness, and you can be multiple audiences coming to that. Grandma and a 7-year-old can go to that movie and come away with something besides just, the time passed really well. And so in terms of a modern retelling, if you can't say that, if you can't say people will be entertained for an hour and 45 minutes by a really great story and interesting characters, and they'll come away with something to think about, which I should add, shouldn't be a clunking hammer blow to the head of...
Get it? Don't you get it? You don't want that in your sci-fi
That's the
movie?
other thing, is that this film is a masterclass in how to do things without overstating them.
Right. Within the framework of the filmic language, I think. With utilizing the language of cinema without utilizing dialogue direct. And I think that, like you mentioned, by the end of this movie, you could take this movie in like 8 different directions in terms of how you can apply it to something. The thing that I would say, applicable wise in terms of another direction to go is the idea, and we've mentioned it already. It is a ship full of men that have been on a year's journey, that have no women on the ship, that come across a father and daughter on a planet. And this is the first woman that they've seen in however many years for some of them. That is a direction you could go down there and take that and see where that takes you, and see what the text and subtext of the medium and what they've done. Like, I love that there's no, in a David Lynch sort of way, and I'm not saying that this is Lynchian in its tone or message, but Lynchian in that just like, take from this what you will. I'm not going to give you what my thoughts are up front. I will give you plenty of avenues to go down. You go down those avenues. Any of them are fine by me, because I don't have to tell you what it's about. I can just give you all the roads to go down, knowing that any of those roads you go down, I, in my mind, have assumed is a fair interpretation of the source material. And for most things, there's like 8 million different ways you can go down. So, there's like 4 or 5 ones that I think are kind of overwhelmingly obvious. But for me, it's just this idea of, like you said, like we can have something interesting to say without clubbing you over the head with it repeatedly. And the best sci-fi doesn't. The best sci-fi doesn't make you feel dumb. Like, having to repeat things 8 million times doesn't make the viewer seem smart. It feels like you don't trust the viewer.
Yes, this is also a film that, you've seen the following in movies a lot, where it just always bothers me. You've got a room full of scientists at NASA, and they're describing a scientific phenomenon, and one of them says, give that to me in English, or, explain it to me. And I personally and what did this recently and very well was the opening 7 or 8 minutes of the Pluribus television series, where you have nothing, the first 7 or 8 minutes, you have nothing but scientists talking scientist talk, and they make no compromise to like the ordinary audience. But you catch on where they're going. This right. Goes to the discussion that we had about the movie Iceman, where I'm a big fan of, and this has been done in a number of properties, including Andor and others. I'm a big fan of not translating when no translation is needed.
Prometheus does that as well.
Yeah, that's right. And so this film, it's simple in its mechanics. So again, if you just told the plot to somebody, they'd say, well, that's a pretty simple plot. But the point is that it gets a story across and the moral, the ethical questions, the love story, the adventure, just it does everything a movie can do. And how many movies today really have multi-generational appeal, multi-ideological appeal? Like, I mean, I don't care what your politics are. I think you'd enjoy this movie. Now, there are some things like, the daughter is very 1950s young woman, and the crew of the ship are, they're all white and they're all male. And, they did have problems back then sort of projecting diversity in the future. But as I always say to my students, ask yourself, what were their choices at the time? And then ask yourself, maybe if we watch our movies 100 years from now, what are they going to say?
Oh, yeah.
Like, wait a minute, the cat is enslaved. The cat doesn't have its freedom of independence and is a citizen, voting citizen or something. I mean, there's all sorts of things which maybe the future will critique in us. That doesn't mean we can't recognize some of the issues, but I don't like it when people just dismiss a property and say, oh, it has this bad thing from the 1950s. It has a lot of good things which are still applicable today.
The Jazz Singer is a Al Jolson film where he wears blackface. That came out, 20, 30 years before this film did? That doesn't discount the quality or nature of that movie. And I think that like you said, it's important to understand when, the context of when things were made is important. And, I was talking about this recently with Richard Haddam, and Mike White over on Rankin on Bond, where we were talking about Ian Fleming's books. And recently, Ian Fleming's books have been edited for now, I guess. And it really irritated Richard, and it irritates me as well, because if it's that big of a deal, which I'm not saying it's not for some people, it's not for me, because I can understand context and intention and time and space when things were written. If it's that big of a deal, just put a warning in the book. Don't change things. Don't go in and retroactively change things to prove a point or to better suit the narrative of the way things are done now, because at one point, blackface was acceptable as an art form. It's not now.
Yeah, it's a historical document, right? And
like Galaxy
the question
Quest,
is, are you
the historical
denying
texts.
History at that point? I mean,
so.
Whose side are you on when you deny history, especially since we will have, if we edit everything, then a couple of years from now, we'll have a generation of people who will not know that anything bad ever happened, or anything wrong ever happened, because they'll have never seen it. How can you decry negative race relations in the 1930s and laws oppressing Black people if nobody ever learns about them, because they never see them at least in an entertainment form.
Right.
Or they're not allowed to look at actual historical documents that use offensive language today. What is offensive language today?
Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer are still being taught
Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln did not use politically acceptable language today. Okay.
Right. No. But most politicians of the time
have no idea. We should never read Lincoln.
No, and it's a very slippery slope with stuff like this. And I always, I know people roll their eyes at that, but you can't apply the same rules to everything. And I think that, to go back and look at something like Forbidden Planet, it's very interesting. You mentioned the kind of lack of people of color. Well, but then contrast that with the thing that you've already mentioned that this inspired, which is Star Trek. And what was one of Gene Roddenberry's literal points with that show was to show that the future in sci-fi is going to be democratic in the way it's everybody. It's literally everybody. It's George Takei, a man of Asian descent. Walter Koenig, a man who can, do a laughable Russian accent, but a Russian accent nonetheless. Yvette Nichols, not Yvette Nichols, Jesus. Oh God, what's her name? The actress, Nicole Nichols, the woman who plays Uhura. Again, even someone like, Spock made to look like something else, but in a crew of humans. James Doohan is Scottish. You have all of this in Star Trek almost as a response to Forbidden Planet, as Forbidden Planet was just a ship of white men going to a planet with white people. And yes, there are people that die. They just happen to be the white men because that's the only people in the movie that there are. There is no one else. And it's interesting because Star Trek is a direct repudiation of that, which I think is interesting. Forbidden Planet sets the table well for a direction of the future to take. And then Star Trek goes, but yes, in the future, people would stop being racist, hopefully, and stop caring about the color of each other's skin and worry about the moral and the conduct of each other's characters. And that's what Star Trek preaches. Star Trek has always preached that, from having a Vulcan on a human ship to having people of color on a ship when a time and place is being made in where it is a primarily white-driven culture. Those are things that sci-fi is hoping for, but in the irony of it all, in creating content that is hoping for that, it affects that in turn. And that's what's so important about sci-fi.
And we have the famous story of Nicole Nichols I think I'm getting her name right. Yeah, I hope so. The great Nicole Nichols. At one point, thinking about not being on Star Trek, and who talks her into staying on Star Trek? Martin Luther King Jr.
Right, because he got it.
We need you up there on the screen, being efficient and competent and part of the crew and getting along and solving problems, together. We need that. And by the way, just to go a little further on Star Trek, something else, it doesn't get as much attention, but Gene Roddenberry snuck in, and I think the show changed the networks, right? Because the networks were very uncomfortable. There was this belief that especially in parts of the country, if you had a mixed cast, that you would get either lower attendance, lower viewership, or you would get protests or something like that.
Right.
Okay. And that lasted through the 60s, at least, maybe even beyond there.
I mean, the Little Mermaid
Gene
film that
Roddenberry
cast a black actress got, backlash because they cast a black actress. So I think it's died down a lot, but it's still there. It still exists in pockets. It's just died down so much that I think it's the only people that are doing it now are considered fringe. You know what I mean? Like off in a direction that it's like sci-fi. Sci-fi has been preaching this for 60 years. Like, stop fighting something that sci-fi has been ahead of.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that in a second, because I think there's a spin on that I want to discuss. But I just want to point out, Gene Roddenberry did something else which he doesn't get as much attention to. At one point, there's a black admiral that Kirk answers to. Right. And I thought, well, that's when I watched Star Trek in the 1970s as a kid, right? So and already there were a lot of TV shows, The Jeffersons, they were black cops, black detectives, black mayors on TV. So there was a change occurring already, but that was really interesting to have a black boss. That I don't know whether that somebody who's a better television historian will have to tell me, was that the first time in a movie or in a TV show that a white man answered to a black boss or not? Was that a breakthrough or not? I can't believe it was the first, but it's possible. I mean, television took a while to catch up. Just to go on what you were saying there, and I again, this is where I always encourage our students to just, it really feels good to criticize other people and people in the past for not being with it or up to date.
Culturally sensitive by our approximation.
Yeah, but it is also worth asking, what are we going to be criticized for many years in the future? So I think there are critiques that are legitimate when... But this is what gets me sometimes is you'll see a cast. Well, I mean, okay, so the retconning of diversity into historical situations where there wasn't. Right.
Which is a very weird, I wouldn't say weird, but it's like, it's a thing now that we're kind of like contending with, which I think is being done to subversive and transgressive effect, but also to just like, what the hell are we doing? Like, what the hell are we doing? Like, what is going on here?
Yeah, and I understand, and I my friends in history departments will say, well, the past was a little bit more diverse than our stereotypes of the past. Like, for example, there were black people in medieval England and things like that. It isn't.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Yeah. But when it's obviously done and then no one notices within the story space and it's not dealt with as something, then you wonder whether, again, there's this issue of like they're covering up the past. They're making the past, white. They're whitewashing literally the past of saying that like, well, why would it be actually unlikely that Mr. Darcy would be a black man or something like that in Jane Austen? Well, let's talk about why that would be unlikely. I mean, to me, discussing the unhappy things from the past is part of discussing the past, and entertainment should not be pretending those didn't exist. But going back to this movie, I want to, maybe this is where we're wrapping up or not, but the Krell are very interesting because
we've barely talked about the subsuming thing of this movie that I've wanted to talk about, which I'm sure you have as well.
Well, part of the challenge that television, and again, I watched these first two episodes of The Orville, and the way that television was, Star Trek was famously given this tiny budget. I think by the time the show was canceled, they had only like $70,000 an episode, which even in the 1960s was just pitiful. And so, yeah, most aliens were humans with a proboscis prosthetic, or they had a green dye job or like a little horn or husk or something like that. And it's only later with CGI sometimes that we can have more different, interesting aliens. These aliens were really alien. You know how we complain sometimes that like aliens in movies are just us with a costume on, physically or mentally, right? Like their motivations don't seem to be any different than the average Canadian.
Right, yeah.
Even though they're from another galaxy. But these aliens
in some cases
were
from France.
Truly alien. And that's a big deal.
Well, and what I love about it is it's twofold. They're clearly like alien in the way that they are portrayed through the environment on screen, because again, we never see them, but they're also alien. They're alien in external presentation, but they're still very human adjacent in their motivations and their machinations. And you talked about watching the Orville, to go back to Covenant and Prometheus. In those films, the creatures look human and have human machinations. I don't think they needed to look human to have human machinations. They clearly thought that needed to be the case, but you don't have to have something look human to have human machinations. To have the machinations of someone that is greedy or spiteful or wants power or any of these things is understandable, because I don't think that's purely a human thing. I think that is a characteristic of sentient beings, is to want to go into business for yourself or to help others or take advantage of a situation as an opportunist or not. Like, I'm not sure that that's human, in as much as that's just our ability to understand it through our own lens of interpretation. But I love that the Krell in this movie, the entire point of their existence is they are so technologically advanced that they Ian Malcolmed themselves and didn't ask if they should. They just did. And in not asking if they should and only doing, they created something that they could not contain, which is a machine that puts the id into reality, which, as we all know, the idea of killing the ego is so, I think, important, especially as a creative. It's important. But I think if you're teaching or leading or in charge of people, I think it's important to not have an ego. I think it's important to lead without an ego and to understand that having an ego can be really detrimental to progress and other things. And the id is such a big, it's part and parcel with that. And to see in this movie, the Krell were brought down by their own, essentially, animalistic super id is I think it's so insane to me, because I was not expecting that with this movie at all. But then to have them be like, well, they made such technological advances that it advanced past their ability to contain it, and it advanced past their understanding of their own situation, which is, you've turned thought into reality. I love that is one of the themes and directions that you could take another hour, 2 hours of this conversation down. Because that, for me, was the interesting conversation that he's having, is your ego and your manifestation of your wants and desires, uncontrolled, unchecked, taking over and harming and destroying things. It's like, what an interesting idea for a film. Of course, it's a sci-fi movie that's doing it. Sci-fi is the playground for these kinds of things. Horror movies are now. Sci-fi movies used to be. It's interesting that they've kind of flip-flopped. Horror movies used to not be a place where we would have interesting, heady discussions about things, and it was sci-fi. Now it's flopped. Maybe Project Hail Mary might be a step in the right direction for sci-fi in terms of it returning to a loftier, positive, more optimistic goal. But now it's like horror movies are where we can have these interesting conversations about human ego or big emotional questions. And that wasn't the case for the longest time. It was almost like sci-fi was the genre to take those ideas and run with in often interesting, entertaining ways.
Yes. And maybe this is where I want to wrap up, but let me quote Mr. Spock. You mentioned Mr. Spock, right? And this chain of associations, and we can say Robby the Robot led to a lot of robots, including C-3PO and R2-D2. But we can also say this idea about the mind of any creature and technology, the relationship of the two. And I was watching something the other day. I certainly am old enough to remember when I saw Star Trek: The New Generation that this Q being came along.
Yeah.
And I was going like, wait a minute, wasn't that the same? And there's been a fan theory about this for a long time, and it's turned out to be one of the things where actually there was a connection. The original Star Trek series had the Squire of Gothos, who was this being who could, just using his mind, and it turns out, surprise, there's a machine behind the wall, using the machine to make whatever was in his mind come into reality.
One of my favorite episodes of the original series, by the way. Literally one that I've seen a million times.
And anyone who wants to can go look at the story of like how Q came from that. But there's a fantastic quote, which, again, you're thinking a 1960s science fiction producing such depth of intellectual insight and really things to think about as a young person watching the show. Because Star Trek, the original generation, just like today, a lot of young kids watching, a lot of older people watching. Spock says to the Squire of Gothos, this child who has a lot of power and is like using it for humiliating people or destroying things. Spock says, I object to you. I object to intellect without discipline. I object to power without constructive purpose. And that what a beautiful insight, which really could be the moral of Forbidden Planet, but has carried to the present day about our relationship with technology and also our relationship with power within the story space of everything, including science fiction. And so that idea of intellect must be coupled with discipline and must be for a positive purpose. The Krell, no matter how advanced they were, missed that. The film was about humans being reminded of it. And then, like, what would they do with that knowledge? Will they use it effectively or not?
And what's interesting is where the film leaves us is, oh, by the way, humanity will get here too. And it's like, and what I find to be interesting is you can read that one of two ways. You can read it as humanity will get to the point with the Krell, where the Krell did, where they just wipe themselves out by unchecked, power being used in an unchecked way, or humanity will get there too, or Earth will get here too, as in they will get to the point where they understand this and are able to do something with it, as opposed to just letting it run rampant. The movie, I think, leaves it up to interpretation as to where it thinks things are going to go. I mean, just to go to, like you said, how modern day times have evolved, like the need for checks and balances and corrections on power, overwhelming power and absolute power, I think are important. And I think, this movie shows that, again, in a world of unchecked balances, things that often, one small thing, one small missed detail that, oh, by the way, your supercomputer can tap into the subconscious id. Oops. Like, it can make everything real, including your thoughts and notions can be turned real. And then those thoughts and notions can not only be turned real, but then can be at the hands of the controls, is, again, like, to go back to having, you talked about Star Trek, to go back to the, Covenant and Prometheus of it all. We have a movie about creators creating a creation that is then yearning to create as well, which puts into the universe problems of reasons for creation and intention behind creation and need to create and ego. And if you just don't allow the thing that you've created to create, you can cut that off completely and it's never a problem. But again, to go back to the idea of Forbidden Planet, where we forget the one thing or we overlook the one thing, it contributes to the entire downfall. And in Covenant, I want to say Walter, one of the two characters David or Michael Fassbender plays, says, in a symphony, one discordant tone will over time ruin the entire melody. And it's like, that's true, because one discordant tone is the only thing you can focus on. By definition, destroys your ability to enjoy it at all, because that's all you're focusing on. And it's that same thing here. They overlooked the one thing they should have been focusing on, which is their own egos. And I don't think they need to remake this movie. Just like, another movie, because you had sent me a list of things to talk about. One of the other movies on this list is The Day the Earth Stood Still, which I would contend also did not need a remake. For the same reason that this one doesn't. It can be applicable forwards and backwards. And I think that is truly the sign of a timeless piece of film or TV or literature or music that transcends all capable rational thought and cements itself as something worth talking about in 1966, 1976, 1986, 1996, and so on. And every time you reappraise it, the way you reappraise it will probably change just a bit, if not a lot, oftentimes depending on you, but sometimes just depending on the world you're in, because the questions and comments that this film is having are always going to be applicable to any time and place, because what they're asking and talking about is just human emotions at the core of it. Even though the Krell are aliens and we see that they're aliens, they still have a human emotion, or what we perceive as human emotion at the core of it. Though I think we, uniquely having our hands on emotions, I think is kind of amusing. Star Trek shows us that's clearly not the case. The Vulcans don't have human emotions, but the Klingons have all kinds of emotions. So are those Klingon emotions or human emotions? I really appreciate, Dr. Perlmutter, that you have relit the fire underneath me to watch more sci-fi, because I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, an old friend. I'm coming back to it. I mentioned to you, my dad growing up would give me Ben Bova and Isaac Asimov and Piers Anthony books, which is like of a certain kind of sci-fi and of a certain time and place in sci-fi. That's a very high watermark. And this movie, I think, is similarly a very high watermark for a very specific kind of sci-fi, which is to say, well-made sci-fi. Thank you for introducing me to this movie, and also for pushing me back kind of into the realm of sci-fi, because it's not something I had been really watching for a very long time, but the needle's been swinging back towards it a lot, and there have been a couple people pushing in that direction, and you're one of them. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I think, going back to what you said originally, I have my favorite genres and subgenres, but I'm willing to watch anything and ask questions about its intentions, its successes, its methods, and all movies, television show, digital games, books, I guess whatever media we have in the future are of interest, because they're the best. Like this one, we can take away these applicable, not necessarily lessons. It's not necessarily like, and so this is what we must do in these situations. It's questions we should be asking ourselves. The Krell destroyed themselves because they weren't stopping to say, now, well, we can do this. Should we do it? Let's, as you said, let's think about this. What are the scenarios where this could go wrong? Right. Do we know ourselves as much as we should know ourselves? So asking good questions is what movies do, besides providing answers. And I think science fiction has always served as this template for asking questions about what would society be like if we changed this, or if we did that,
or if we had unchecked access to scientific marvels that we could only at this time dream of. And now we're, so far past where this is, in a lot of ways, but still nowhere near where this wants us to be, which I think Star Trek and the best kind of sci-fi really preaches. Like, when we have access to all this technology, why aren't we using it to make things better? Like, why are we using it for other things? And it's like, well, because human beings are involved, and human beings are complex, and human beings are multifaceted, and that everybody has a different reason for doing things. Whether or not they tell you is a different story. And like you said, unchecked power, if you sit there and you don't ask questions, and if you're not being introspective about things, you can forget the minorest of details, and the minorest of details, sometimes that's enough. So thank you, Dr. Perlmutter, for introducing me to this film. I really enjoyed it. We could probably talk for another 2 or 3 hours about it. Maybe down the road when they remake it, maybe we can cover the remake, and we can get Richard on here, and the three of us can bemoan how the remake is all of a sudden an allegory about what was The Day the Earth Stood Still ended up being about, like green
climate change.
So whatever, I don't know what the idea du jour would be for this one at the time whenever they remake it. Maybe it probably will be AI, a little lean further
data centers.
into AI. Yeah.
The aliens are going to come and tell us, don't destroy your world with data centers. So.
That's right. So, but as always, thank you so much for programming this episode, Dr. Perlmutter. I've obviously enjoyed it. If you want to hear more of Dr. Perlmutter and I talking, not exclusively just he and I, but so far it's been he and I and a couple guests from time to time, head on over to the Kulturecast, where he joins me from time to time to talk about movies and maybe errant TV show in the future. Maybe we can do like a Patreon thing, because I know there are trees that you keep barking up that you want me to climb. So maybe I'll climb them. We just have to incentivize people to listen to it in a financial way. Speaking of the financial way of incentivizing people to listen to things, patreon.com/Kulturecast is where you can go to do that. $5 or more gets you access to bonus episodes, and $10 or more gets you access to Rankin' on Bond, which is me and Richard Haddam and Mike White. Yes, I know I used poor grammar, talking about James Bond movies, and we're almost done. We're like literally like 1 or 2 movies from the end. So that's the thing you're into. Go do that. Otherwise, Kulturecast.com and weirdingwaymedia.com is where you can go and find this show and so many other shows. So go do that. Dr. Perlmutter, thank you so much for joining me. This has been fun, as always.
Thank you.
And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.